All right, good morning. It is good to be with you. I bring you greetings from ULM, from the Baptist Collegiate Ministries. We had a great year of ministry. We had students come to know the Lord, both American and international. We had students grow in leadership, grow in their faith, and had a great experience. We have students serving literally all over the country and the world on missions this summer, and all of this happens because of support of churches like this. So thank you very much. Last month, I actually got to take 4 guys to Paris. We were there doing some very pre-Olympic ministry, connecting people to church, sharing the gospel, and it was a great experience. And so travel can be an interesting thing at times, correct? And so last week, just like Garrison, Braden, I got to go to the Southern Baptist Convention, and I was traveling back with my pastor, James Doty from First Baptist Monroe. We were leaving on Wednesday night, and we got on the plane and everything was great. Like, you know those times you get on a plane and everything's going well? Like you get the seats, we were in exit rows, you know what I mean? The people around us weren't taking the elbow room on the armrest. I mean, everything was going great, and they closed the door, and that's when it began. So they closed the door, and the emergency slide on the plane popped out. And apparently you cannot fly like that. And so they said, oh, well, it'll be slightly delayed. And I was like, oh, that's fine. And so they began to work on it. They told us several times, well, you know, Indianapolis is not a hub, and so we have to rely on the people here. We don't have a Delta crew. They kept making these explanations. And so finally, they said, we're ready to go. But we had a thing called a connection, which means we had to get to another plane in time to be able to take off. And so originally, me and James were like, we've got plenty of time. We get to go, and we get to go eat, and then we can make it to our gate, and we're just having this great travel home after a great week at the convention. But then I started doing the math, and I said, I think when we land, we're going to have 15 minutes to get to our connecting gate. Because I don't know if you knew, they like to stick little flights like to Monroe way out there in airports. And so we finally get there, and we land, and we're debating, do we try to make it? Do we run across the airport? What do we do in this moment? And you can see that there are different levels of panic on the plane around us with other people having connections they had to make. And so we decided that we would give it a try. Now, we landed in Concourse A, and we were in Atlanta. Now, if you've ever been to the Atlanta airport, you will know the Atlanta airport is just concourses right on a road that are connected underground by a train. So it's kind of easy to get around. It's a relatively compact airport to be the busiest airport in the world. Literally the busiest airport in the world is Atlanta. And we landed in A, and of course we had to get to Concourse D. So we got out of the plane, we had all our carry-on luggage, and we ran what I like to call Home Alone style through the airport. If you've seen Home Alone, you know how the family runs through the airport? We were doing that, and not that it super matters, but it's really hard to look cool running through an airport. And so we were going, and we were running, and we were sweating, and we got down, and we went down to the train, and I was like, we're gonna make it. And the train door was open. And I was like, just look at God. The train doors are open, and we ran in, and then we stood there, and we didn't move. Because the train is supposed to move and take us to all the other concourses. But then an announcement came over. They said, we are temporarily delayed on our train service. And I was like, well, I guess we could walk to our gate. Our gate being Concourse D, gate 46, the literal last gate in Concourse D. And so we stood there and we debated, should we wait, should we go? And then that pause that we had right there, I think really was the problem, because then they came over and said, the train should be running in about 10 minutes. Now, I don't know if you know what that means in travel talk. That means they're lying to you, okay? About 10 minutes is about what they say, so you don't freak out. And so I said, all right, we gotta go. And so we were trying to walk, because all the concourses have this underground well that you can connect, but not only us, but every person around us decided the same thing. So we are running, and we are trying to get through, and we go through A, and we go through B, and we go through C, and we go through D, and I've lost James. He is younger, he is in more shape, he is much further up. I'm dragging my bag, I'm sweating, my calves are burning, all of this kind of stuff, and I finally get up, and I'm going, and I'm running, I'm like, he's gotten there, he's gonna hold the door, and I get to about D34, and James calls, and he says, they just shut the door. And we did not make our flight. And so we ended up getting back the next day. We stayed in a hotel like everything was fine. And so I'm sure all of y'all have had these kind of situations before Maybe you were traveling, you were driving somewhere, and then there was traffic and you were stuck and you had all these kind of things. There is a term that we can use for when these kind of things happen. When we are trying to go somewhere, we have a plan, we have a set goal, we have all these kind of things of how we're going to go, when we're going to get there, what we're going to do when it happens. And what this is called traveling. This is just called traveling. Like, this is just part of the game. This is just part of the deal. Think about all the times you've gone somewhere. Think about all the times you traveled. Sometimes it's real smooth, right? There's no trouble. There's no delays. Like, there's nothing. You just go. And sometimes you have stories like this where you end up several days out. In January, I had a friend that was going through during the winter storms. He was delayed from Monday to Thursday getting home. Like, sometimes we have these huge, long stories. What this is called traveling, because if you want to travel, these things are just going to happen. But every time these things happen, how do we react? I reacted by emailing Delta and letting them know about my experience, but we tend to react and be like, I can't believe this. I'm so annoyed at this. I had these plans. I had these things. I had all this kind of stuff. We tend to get upset because our natural assumption is that our plans are always going to work out the way we think they're going to work out. That doesn't just happen in traveling. That happens in life as well. We all have this sort of idea that everything's going to go according to the plan that we want. And we all have this sort of idea that things are going to work out. You know, big picture and small picture. Everybody thinks their lunch plans are going to be great today. What they're going to do this week, it's all going to work out. And even big picture, when you think about your life, when you think about career, when you think about family, when you think about your kids, you have this idea of, hey, I think it's all kind of going to go this way. And when it doesn't, we tend to get frustrated, we tend to get upset, and we tend to begin to question things. And I mention that because the passage we're going to look at today in the book of Mark gives us a clear example of a time this happened to a group of men, to the disciples. So if you would open up your Bibles to the book of Mark, chapter number 4. Look at Mark chapter 4, we're going to start in verse 35. I know you guys have been walking through the book of Mark, through the gospel, through this account of the life and ministry of Jesus. And here at the end of Mark 4, we are still pretty early in the ministry of Jesus, but he has taught and he has brought on the disciples. And this is one of those real moments that it begins to really clear up to the people around him just who Jesus was. And it helps us to clearly understand, not just for this time, but for us today, clearly who Jesus is. So, Jesus has been teaching, he has been preaching in parables, he has been spending time with the disciples, and in verse 35, it says, on that day, when evening had come, he said to them, being Jesus said to him, let's go across to the other side, okay? Jesus had been teaching, he had been preaching, and he wanted to go to the other side, and the most economical way to do that was by boat. This was the Lake of Galilee. This was a very well-traveled body of water that they used to get across so they did not have to get around. So in verse 36 it says, and leaving the crowds, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. So, a lot of things were going on. A lot of people were traveling. They were going back and forth on this lake, which is a very common thing to do, okay? This was one of the water highways, let's say, that they used. So they traveled and they went around to get around from place to place, because Jesus had been teaching in one place, wanted to go to another, was with the disciples. They got in the boat, they began to travel, other boats were going around. Now, the disciples had different backgrounds, different careers, different experiences, but they were all pretty well-versed in being on the water, all right? They were well-versed in being there and being around and being on the water, so they traveled around just like that. And in verse 37, they began to have trouble. Verse 37 says, and a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. It says a great windstorm arose. This was something that happened. They had storms out on the water. Just like when I traveled the other day, just like when you travel sometimes we get weather delays. Weather can delay our travels, weather can delay our ball games, weather can ruin our plans, weather is this thing that we have to work around. And this was not an uncommon thing. The way that this lake sits in this area with mountains and stuff around, the winds kind of come in and kind of catch. So this was not the first windstorm that had ever happened in the history of the Lake of Galilee. And I say that because I think that is an important thing for us to know about this. as they were going through, this was something that they should have expected, okay? I've got 3 points I want us to see out of this passage. And the number one that I want to show this morning is that storms are expected. Storms are expected. Like we're going to have them. I'm sure you guys, have you heard about this hurricane report for this coming season? It's supposed to be bad, okay? Storms coming through Louisiana. Everybody just turned to they're like, what? So yeah, sorry to ruin your day, but it's going to be terrible. But storms are expected. Like we are going to have bad weather. We are going to have bad storms. Like we had last week, a couple weeks ago, we had those bad storms that kind of came through, knocked out power in different places. Guess what? We're going to have another, all right? It's going to keep coming. We're going to be having these storms in life, okay? And not just this, in the same way that weather can ruin our plans, there's lots of other things that can as well. And some of those things are minor annoyances, and some of those are major problems, okay? So when I say that storms are expected, I don't just mean weather, I mean in life as well. Some of you are going to go to work this week and you're going to have a big problem. Some of you guys are going to have an issue that gets raised in your family this week. Some of you guys over the next few weeks, months, and years, you're going to face big things that are going to happen. We face sickness, and we face illness, and we face death, and we face unemployment, and we face crises in our country. Like all of these things are coming. And what we need to look at here and see is that in the same way the disciples should have expected that at times being out on the water means there's going to be storms, walking and living and functioning as a person living in life today, there are going to be storms that come in our life as well. Like these things are just going to happen. And it's funny because it seems like we're surprised every time, right? What they say about the best laid plans of mice and men, they often go awry. That is what happens in life. We have plans, we have ideas, we have things that are going to happen, but these things happen. Sometimes there are small things that impact our day. Sometimes there are major things that impact our whole life. But usually there's a point in all this when things really start to spiral, right? Like think about times you've had crazy things in your life and you're like, I can pinpoint the moment where I was like, I've got this under control, and you realize you don't at all. So I know I don't look it, but a couple years ago I turned 40 years old. And for my 40th birthday, me, Garrison, our friend Wes Pierce, and my friend Joel, we went where all 40-year-old men go for their birthday, and we went to Walt Disney World. And so we were there over Labor Day weekend, and beforehand we learned there was a high potential of a storm, of a hurricane coming through. And this was like a hurricane coming through Florida. And guess what? They come from different directions there. Here in Louisiana, we know kind of the paths that storms take. We know kind of directions. In Florida, they can come east, west, north, south. And so we were trying to make plans. We were trying to figure out, should we go, whatever. And so I said, I'm going to be proactive. I said, I'm going to rent us a car just in case we have to abandon, Mickey and drive north just to see what happens. And so we were going, and we were a little nervous about it because this was a trip we were excited about. We've been planning it for like a year. And so the moment that things changed was Friday night. It was Friday night, and we were eating. We were about to go hang out at the parks, and we knew the storm was coming. And then a piece of information was given to us that Monday the storm was coming through. And that was the day that we were supposed to be flying out. And the day that we were flying out, the Orlando International Airport said, we're going to be closed. Like they closed the airport 3 days early. Like no planes coming, no planes going. It was all over the news. We were supposed to fly on Monday, and so we were going to have to come up with another plan. And this is the moment that we started to spiral. This is the moment we started to try to figure this out. And so we were trying to make plans. We were talking to a waitress there that put complete fear into us because she's like, yes, everything just goes crazy here and all of this. And so everything started to spiral. And in fact, Garrison got on the phone with our good friends at American Airlines, and in great kindness, he said one of my favorite Garrison lines he's ever said, because American Airlines had no proof the airport was closed. They said, it's not in our system. And I understand that's how things work. Everybody's got systems. If it's not in our system, there's nothing you can do about it. And Garrison, in a very kind way, asked her, does American Airlines not have Google? Because that's where they were telling this information. We all have that moment that things begin to spiral, right? And for the disciples, the moment that began to spiral was when the water started coming into the boat. And that's when they were like, okay, this is not just a storm. This is a bad storm. This is a gully washer. Is that a phrase that people use down here? This is a bad storm, and they were not ready to hunker down, let's say. And they began to panic, because we all have that moment in trouble when it feels like that, right? You think you've got it under control, you think you've got it figured out, and then finally you just reach that point when you start to panic. You panic in your mind, you panic in your heart, you start to wonder if everything's going to be okay. You start to wonder, and that's what the disciples were doing. The water was coming in, and they said, "What, is this it? Are we going to drown on this lake today?" Like, they knew that was the risk. And they were confused because while all this was happening, where was Jesus? In verse 38, it says, "But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion, and they woke him and said to him, 'Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?'" Now, there are a couple odd details in this passage. Like, Mark is very clear about these things. He tells us, number one, that Jesus was asleep, but not just that. He tells us where Jesus was sleeping. He was sleeping in the stern. And he also tells us what he was sleeping on. Now, I don't know why Mark included those details, but maybe he did it because he wanted to really make us understand how asleep Jesus was. This wasn't a metaphoric, like Jesus was in the state of sleep as he communed with the Father. No, Jesus, fully man and fully God, was flat sleeping through a storm. Now, I don't know if you guys are heavy sleepers, but I am not. So the idea of sleeping through this really, really amazes me. So they went down to the stern, woke him up from the cushion, and what did they say to him? What did they say to this Jesus that they had dropped their nets to follow? What did they say to this Jesus who was talking and who was preaching and who was doing all these things, who they were following? They said, "Jesus, do you not care about us?" Their first reaction was panic. As the water came in, they began to panic, and the second reaction was blame. They said, "Jesus, we are panicking and you don't care." Because that's what happens in the storms. And the second thing I want us to see is that storms are expected and that storms cause overreactions. Storms cause overreactions. I don't know if you've ever overreacted to something in life, but I have, a time or two. I tend to overreact to simple things, and I tend to overreact to large things. What happened here is that's what the disciples did. They didn't say, "Jesus, can you help?" "Jesus, what's going on?" They say, "Jesus, do you not care?" Could you imagine saying that to the Son of God? Do you not care that we are perishing? Do you not care that we are about to drown? Do you not care that you and your ministry and all this is about to stop? They panicked and they blamed. And how often do we do the same thing? We tend to panic when things go bad, right? I have a source of something in my life that causes me great panic and great blame all the time. Now, I'm not from Louisiana. I grew up in East Tennessee, and the thing that causes me more panic and more question in my life than almost anything in my life is any sports team related to the University of Tennessee. Now, I grew up in East Tennessee. I was born at the University of Tennessee Hospital. I didn't go to school there. I went to Carson Newman College. But Tennessee really causes me great emotional strain. And I know that, down here in LSU country, you never would feel these same kind of things. But let me give an example of the 800 that I have. I don't know if you are aware, the college baseball season is still going. And we're playing in the College World Series on Friday night. Tennessee, if you're not a sports person, you can keep up with me on this. Tennessee is the number one seed, supposed to be the best team in the country. And baseball is 9 innings. So the first inning, I was like, this is great. This is good. And then things began to fall apart. In the third inning, the Florida State Seminoles scored 6 runs, and I began to go through the same emotional process I go through all the time. Why am I watching this? Why do I do this to myself? It's the same old thing. Being good at baseball is new to us in Tennessee. We're not used to this like y'all are. And every time we go to Omaha, we just lose. And I was like, here we go again. Oh, same old Vols. I start to sound like my dad, complaining about this. And so we're going through, and for 8.5 innings, everything was terrible. And I was turning it off, and I was turning it on. I was checking the score. I was thinking, it doesn't matter. This is stupid. It's just baseball. I was going through all of this kind of stuff because I tend to overreact because experience has taught me that. But Luckily, deep in the ninth inning, I reached euphoria where Tennessee came back and had a walk-off win, and we'll continue on in the progress in this World Series. But we tend to overreact to things, right? Our team gets down one score. Oh, here they go again. Same old thing. You know, your kid does that same thing they do all the time because they're kids. You're like, oh, they're never going to learn. You go to work and the same person you've explained that same thing to over and over does the same thing over and over, and you tend to overreact. We overreact to small things and we overreact to large things. When the disciples, in their fear and their panic, saw the water begin to come over, they began to panic to the point that they said, Jesus must not care about us. All this talk, all this experience, all this stuff, it doesn't matter because he's not proving it right now. You ever felt like that? Because I have. You ever had moments in life when you thought you understood what life was going to be and how things were going to be and what was going to work out, and then a spiral happened and tragedy happened and these things happened and you began to ask yourself, well, maybe all this stuff I believe, maybe it's not true. You know, all this stuff I believe about who Jesus is in the Bible and my walk with God, maybe this time it's not there. And maybe not out loud like the disciples said, but maybe in our hearts we say, Jesus, do you not care that I am perishing? Jesus, do you not care that my heart is broken? Jesus, do you not care that I don't know how I'm going to get through this scenario? And that's exactly how they felt, and it makes sense, right? We are frail people who tend to forget things very easy. So how does Jesus react to this? In verse 39, he says, and he awoke, and he rebuked the wind, and he said to the sea, peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. Jesus woke up, got off the cushion, left the stern, went up, and he rebuked the waves. He literally told the waves, stop it. And the term that he uses here, he uses earlier in Mark chapter 1, verse 25, and he rebuked something else. You know what that was in reference to? When he was performing an exorcism and talking to a demon. So in the same way that he is talking to this demon, he talks to the waves and he says, peace, be still. The literal translation that we can use there is to be muzzled. Basically, Jesus came and said, all right, everybody, calm down. And the waves did. The wind stopped. Then the waves stopped. Then the boat stopped rocking. And it just sat there. And they were in what we call awkward silence. Because the waves had been muzzled, the sound had been muzzled, and they didn't know what to say because two things happened at once. Once the disciples realized they had made a real mistake questioning Jesus, and on the other hand, they began to realize this guy just told the weather to stop, and it did. Now, we have the whole testament of who Jesus was in front of us, so it's easy for us to look back. Remember, at the time, they were still figuring this out. They were still learning who Jesus was. And this man stood up, told the weather to calm down, and it did. And so in verse 40, Jesus responds to them, and he said to them, why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? He said to them, why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? Jesus had a point and a mission and a divine plan since the beginning of time to live and to exist on earth, to walk a sinless life, to die and to be resurrected. And that was not going to get interrupted by a windstorm. This was all part of the plan. As the natural daily occurrences happened to the disciples, Jesus knew what the plan was, and he said, just walk with me, just go with me. He says, there is a plan. He said, why are you so afraid? It's like he's still not figured this out. And it's easy for us to be a little critical of the disciples, but remember, they were still learning. They were still figuring out. They were still walking with Jesus. And this is one of the times that really began to teach and to show them who Jesus was. Because in verse 41, what was their reaction? Were they thankful? Were they high-fiving? Were they like, man, that would have been great if we could have filmed that for YouTube? What did they say? Said they were filled with great fear. This literally scared them. Have you ever seen something so impressive you were kind of scared by it? I saw a kid at the BCM do a magic card trick one day that I thought we needed to cast him out. I was so impressed by it. I was like, that's black magic you're doing in here. But he said they were so amazed what Jesus was done. They were filled with fear. They were scared by this. They were overwhelmed by this. They said, this is not just another teacher. This is not just another man. He literally just calmed the weather. This weather we thought was literally going to end our lives, he just told to stop, and it did. And they say, even the wind and the sea obey him. And as we look at this, we have to ask ourselves, well, what is the point? The point is, number one, that Jesus was teaching the disciples who he was. And as we walk through this, it's very easy for us to start to make the connections of, okay, well, there are storms that happen in life, so this passage must be telling me that Jesus is going to calm the storms in my life. And I've heard sermons like that. And I think when we first look at it, we're like, yeah, I think that's true. You know, Jesus was there, and they asked him if they cared, so he calmed the storm, and then everything was fine. But that's not what the point of this is. My study and my reading, I listened to a couple of our great SBC leaders who talked about this. Danny Aiken, who's the president of Southeastern Seminary, says, few stories have been more poorly applied than this one. He says, it is not about Jesus getting you through the storms of life. Jason Meyer, another great writer, says, we read about a physical storm that Jesus stilled for the disciples, and we make it about Jesus stilling the storms of our suffering today. He says, but this passage is not first and foremost about us. It is first and foremost about Jesus. Because what this passage is telling us is that we need to understand how radically, completely, and totally in control of everything Jesus is. Jesus is not just control of your life and your problems and your bad times. He's literally in control of the weather. He is literally in control of what happens on a daily basis as we go around. It's very easy, because we do face storms in life, to see that what we're seeing here. But I think what we need to see is we need to broaden our understanding of the fact that Jesus is in control and wants to walk through us through all problems in life. A mistake that we as Christians make is that when really tough times come along, we say, well, I need Jesus to walk with me through this pain, this trouble, this difficulty, whatever it is. And yes, you do. You know when else you need Jesus to walk with you? Every day. When things are going good, when things are going bad, when the problems are big, when the problems are small, when things are out of hand, when things are in hand. There is no point at any point that you can manage this on your own. We need to walk and we need to live like there is a point and a purpose to everything, to all days, to all things that we are going through. A mistake that we make is saying, well, I can take care of myself until a problem comes along, then I need Jesus to step in and help me with that. But don't we do that? Men, don't we like to think we have things under control? Don't we like to, I can manage my job, I can manage my church, I can manage my family, I can do all this until things get out of control, like, all right, Jesus, now help me. We need Jesus to teach us how to walk and to live every day and in all things. Why is that? Because he is fully God, because he is fully man, because he can literally tell the seas to calm down, and they literally do. And if we can know that and believe that and bring that deep into our hearts, how much would that change the way we live? How much more purpose would that give us on a daily basis? How much more we walk in complete trust? Garrison's favorite, Dallas Willard, says this: we don't believe something by merely saying we believe it, or even when we believe that we believe it. We believe something when we act as if it were true. What if all of this is true? That Jesus can tell the waters and the storms just to calm and be still? What if he loves us so much that he wants to see the goodness in life, wants to see the fullness, wants to see all of these things happen? Because the thing about it is Jesus was not concerned about the storm. Not because he didn't care, not because he didn't want to see them live, but because he knew it was all right. Sometimes there are going to be things that happen in your life that just get solved, right? Sometimes there are problems you have in life that just get fixed. Sometimes you're waiting to know if you're going to get that job and you do. Sometimes you want to hear if you're getting that scholarship and it comes through. Sometimes you want to know what that pregnancy test is going to tell you, and it's positive. And it's great, and it's good. And it's like that storm that's going on in your mind just completely becomes calm. And sometimes it's not. There are some storms that are going to just keep going. There are some problems that you have in your heart and in your mind that are just going to be there. There are just some issues in your family that are always going to exist. There are some illnesses and there's some ailments that you may just have. And those times we question and we wonder because we think things should be the way we want them to be. We think things should go the way we want them to go. And this passage of Scripture does not say, hey, if we just ask Jesus, he'll just calm that storm down. What it says is that he cares and that he loves, even when you have to kind of ride those things out a little bit. Because I kind of wonder, this is Chad's opinion, you know what? If they hadn't woken Jesus up, would he just slept through the whole thing? And was he sleeping through the whole thing because he had such confidence of knowing that they were going to be okay? Because remember, they had to wake him up. And so I knew that Jesus there, he says, do you not still have faith? He says, why are you so afraid? So today, why are we so afraid? Because times are tough. Things are crazy. We could go around to every row and we could hear about the things that are going on and we could talk about the storms of life. We could talk about the storms going on in our country. We could talk about the storms going on in the world. You could talk about the storms going on in your family. All of these still exist. Do we have the faith to walk and to know that even if these things are occurring, that Jesus is still in control? Do we have the faith to believe that sometimes the peace be still, he's not going to be saying to the problem, he's going to be saying to us, peace, be still, be calm, have faith, and trust. Because this side of heaven, there's a lot of things we're not going to understand the why. But do we have the faith to trust and to believe that this Jesus, who is so tuned into the Father's plan that he was literally willing to sleep through the storm, that he'll be able to say to us in that same way, to peace and to be still. So yes, storms are expected. Yes, storms can cause our reactions, but the point is Jesus. That we can walk with him and live with him and allow these things into our hearts in such a way that we live in a different way. So as Garrison does each week say, well, what do we do with this? With the head and with the heart and with our hands. First off, with our head, we need to expect problems. We need to expect that things are going to occur. I believe if we begin to learn to expect these things, we'll be better able to manage these and know that they are continually part of God's plan. For our heart is we need to believe that there is control in life because of who Jesus is. That we need to believe and to know, even when things don't go the way we want, even when things seem difficult, even when we want to shake our hands and say, God, Jesus, do you care that this is happening? We need to know and to believe that he is in such control, not just of the big things, but of the little things and in all things as well. And with our hands, if all of this is true, then we need to daily walk with Jesus. When your schedule is full and busy and overwhelming, we need to walk with Jesus. When things are simple and easy and going your way and you get that great parking spot and the weather's just like you want it to be, you need to walk with Jesus. So we commit to devote ourselves to walking so much with this Jesus that as circumstances in life rise and fall, that we will keep the same perspective, that we will keep the same focus, and we'll be able to say into our own hearts as we walk with Jesus, peace, be still. Would you join me in prayer? Father, we thank you for today and we thank you for your word. And God, as we have expectations in life, and God, as we look into things we would like to happen and the things we don't want to happen, God, I pray you help us to know that storms will occur. And God, I pray you give us a sense of peace and calmness to not be overwhelmed in these moments, as we so often are. Father, I pray as we go through this that we will walk with Jesus, that we'll spend time with Jesus as we spend time in the Word, as we spend time growing and focusing and thinking on these things. We'll begin to grow the faith the disciples lacked at this moment, but we see as they continued on, they begin to grow. And God, may we continue to grow and know this is all about Jesus and who he is. For it's in the name of Christ that we pray. Amen.